Record. All right. So today's workshop is called Rules of Readability. Now, I want to start this off by revisiting something we said at the start of the semester, which is that we aimed to be UF's most advanced computer science community. And I feel like in our last few workshops, we've really lived up to that claim. And okay, all my transitions are going to be lagging tonight, aren't they? That's going to be nice. But yeah, the last like four workshops we've done have been on some really cutting edge stuff. And so in comparison, today's workshop is going to make us look like this. Um, we're talking about code readability today, and that is something that might make you think it's going to put you to sleep when you first look at it, but you will change your mind very quickly as soon as you have to work with other people's code. Um, we want to look at an example right here. There's a lot of things wrong with this, but I want to focus mainly on what this person decided to name their function. So I don't know what a prototypey funky wonks is supposed to do, but if you're working with someone else's code and you're like trying to add a new feature, I think that would probably give you a brain aneurysm. So you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you're learning complicated code bases and having to write complicated code yourself that other people have to work with, things can get really messy really quickly. And we'll show you exactly how. So, um, first thing you need to realize is that you're actually going to read more code than you're going to write in your career. Again, if you haven't been coding for a long time, that might come as a surprise initially, but think about all of the situations where you'll be reading code on a job. Whether you're learning a new code base, whether you're reading documentation for a tool that you're trying to use, fixing a bug in your existing code base, or even in code reviews. In real companies, you can't just write your code in and put it into production. Other engineers have to read that and approve it. So a lot of us might think that this is what coding is like. You get some new project and you're just hacking away most of the time, but it's not realistic at all. Most of your work is going to be done on existing systems, whether that's maintaining existing features or adding new features, but to an existing code base. And what that means is if you're working with an existing system, you're going to have to change existing code. If you have to change existing code, then you have to read it. Like, there's no way around that. So imagine you are a fresh new intern on your first day at a company, and it's day one, and they go tell you to fix a bug in this. Might have you reconsidering your life choices real quickly. Um, and just looking at a lot of these, they're just intimidating. I I don't know what's going on here with the finders. I'm gonna be honest, I never even tried to read this one. This one was on. I found this on Reddit. The guy was like complaining about his coworker on a chat. So you don't please don't write code that's so bad that people screenshot your code on Reddit and complain about it. Most company, I'm pretty sure this is against most companies' policies too. So in general, don't do that either. That will get you fired. I don't know what this is. Uh, okay, this is a bit more readable, but uh, repeat is unnecessarily repeating. If you want to do front end development, this is what you'll have to look forward to for the next 40 years if AI doesn't take your job. Yeah, callback hell. Yep. I don't even know why they thought this was okay. Uh and this looks fine until you look at the brackets on the right side. And this is just another complicated. You guys kind of get the point, right? One random thing I want to point out here is for some reason the line numbers are going down on this. Is this just like some kind of edit? See your account stop. Is this like some kind of editor configuration I've never seen before? Vim roll divide. Okay, it's Vim. That's why I don't know it. Okay. Yeah, I kind of put that there just because I wanted to ask all what it was. But now we're all a bit smarter. Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure you guys looked through all these pictures and you didn't feel very excited. And I'm pretty sure you would feel even less excited if you had to work with it. I want to show you just an example of how some developers may react to you writing crappy code. If anyone's watching this on YouTube in the future, I will warn you, this has very strong language.
All fucking hierarchies and fucking law stuff. Stupid fun. There is no question now it's like that we're in the bottom of bullshit. I don't think you can claim that I know what the fuck's going on. No, I don't think shit. This is pretty messed up. Seriously, this is some convoluted shit. These must be lying.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Yeah. There's this dude ragdolling and paid screaming that's fucking shit up. How about some fucking info on this very book? This makes shit really slow. Without it, it will crash. It's all pain in the ass. It takes some doing and hide the ground for life. Someone drawn, fuck the sun up.
Okay, I don't think that's really surprising to anyone if you've played GTA 5, what the Rockstar devs are like. Um, but all right, can I go to the next slide, please? Maybe to use like an AI to get his voice. Okay, I accidentally got out this slide. Can I? No, no, go. Okay. Sorry, it's 2024 and I still don't know how to use PowerPoint or Zoom. My apologies. Anyway, if there was any important lesson that you learned from that video, it's one, I still need to hide the floating meeting controls. And two, is that other people are going to have to work with your code. And you don't want your coworkers to react like the guy in that video, right? And again, in school, this is something you might not have a lot of experience with. You know, most of the time, we're sweating an assignment, rushing through it, just trying to fit it in before some kind of deadline, right? And we'll be lucky if we get it in at 11:58. And then after that, we never have to deal with that piece of code again. And you can get away with that because, save for a few group projects, no one has to work with your code in school. But that's not how industry works at all, right? You might have big teams of, you might have a team of like 3, 4, 5 people, 10. It could maybe even be a team of 50 people, especially if you work across multiple code bases. And because everyone's working together, you're gonna have to make your code readable by other people. And another thing that really exasperates this is how much software changes. Again, if you've been at SSD before, we've drilled this into your head. Companies have so many reasons to update their code, whether it's fixing a bug, adding a security patch, introducing a new feature, or making you late to meetings. I'm not calling anyone out in particular here. Those changes are built over existing code, right? They're not going to rewrite everything from scratch to add a new feature. So it becomes really important that this is not how your coworkers are reacting to the code you write. Otherwise, it's going to be trouble for you. And it's going to be really bad if the coworker that's reacting to that is one of your team's leads, a senior engineer, or a manager, if your manager reads code. Even if your manager doesn't read code, you better believe that whoever the highest technical leader on the team is going to be telling your manager about your code quality, because that's going to be a big factor in if you return, right? You have to remember that bad code slows down the rest of the team because the entire code base gets harder to work with, and it just makes you look bad. It makes you look like you're not a good developer. So you really don't want that to happen, because again, it's going to give your coworkers an incentive to not want to bring you back. For everyone here who's going into internships and you want to get a return offer, having high quality code is going to be really important for looking like you're an advanced coder who knows what you're doing. Now, good code, on the other hand, does the opposite of all these things, right? It's faster to work with, makes things easier for your teammates, and makes you look competent. Now, again, even if you don't care about anyone else on your team, you're the type who just wants to watch the world burn, or if you're working on solo projects, there's still the fact that you have to work with your code. So all the things that we just mentioned, they apply to you too, right? You might write some new feature and then have to go fix a bug in it 6 months later. And you might think to yourself, who's the idiot who wrote this code? And then you realize it was you, and it doesn't feel very good. So I hope we've established how important readability is, because now we're going to talk about the rules. So first, I just want to get y'all's opinions, and we'll just do this by a show of hand. So what do you guys think is better, the function style on the left or the function style on the right? So option A, raise your hand. Easily. Okay. Option B, raise your hand. Okay, I found the Unity dev. Yeah. Okay. Now, let's say camel case versus snake case. Raise your hand for camel case. That's it's a good point. Yeah, C. Let's say this is C. And hands for a snake case. Okay. So yeah, camel. Yeah. The, does anyone have a strong preference for one or the other? Does anyone think like one is objectively better than the other? Wait, I want to hear your take. A crazy nitpick.
Which maintains clear identification of what the start of the acronym is, as opposed to being a larger acronym like GTAF.
Right.
So to that extent, right?
That's a very good point.
I mean, it's nifty.
Yeah. Well, no, I've actually seen that before. I just didn't do it because I wanted the GTA part to pop out a bit more. But Blake is actually completely right. If you're writing camel case, that is expected in some style guides. But at the end of the day, most of what we said is really just opinions, right? Snake case clearly lost a vote that we had, but if you started coding in snake case on a computer, it's not like your machine's going to blow up or anything. It's not that serious. And a lot of this stuff, at the end of the day, is kind of just opinion. You like what you like, and there are different standards for different languages, but at the end of the day, it's not, those small details aren't the things that have the biggest impact on your code's readability. So one of the most important things you need to remember tonight is that these aren't really rules. They're more like guidelines. And ironically, that is the first rule for tonight. So some of the rules that you're going to hear aren't going to apply in every situation. There's going to be a lot of nuance that you have to apply. And some of these rules can also be abused to, ironically, write really unreadable code. So, for example, let's say you read from some older programmers that, writing shorter code is good. You might hear some people say, oh, this would have been 2 lines of code in another language. And you might get the idea, okay, shorter code is good. But here's the thing, if you apply that religiously, right, you might start writing really bad code. So we've all seen FizzBuzz before, right? We know how this works. If a number, you input a number, if it's divisible by 3 and 5, you write FizzBuzz. If it's divisible by 3, you write Fizz. If it's divisible by 5, you write Buzz. And if it's none of the above, you just return a number. Now, this is pretty clear what this does on its own, but let's say a little Timmy over here, I'm going to pretend his name is Timmy. Let's say he really wants to be aggressive with the idea that short code is good. Well, he might do something like this. And it's shorter, definitely, but I personally wouldn't think that's more readable. And a lot of people would agree here. So that's just like kind of an example to show that you shouldn't follow these rules like they're the Bible, you know? Now, some of you guys might be wondering, well, why did I call them rules? A workshop's called Rules of Readability. Well, to be completely honest with you, it sounds better. I thought it might get attention more because, you know, let me turn down the room volume a little bit. Getting people's attention nowadays is really hard. And some of you guys might say that that's kind of a dishonest tactic. And I say there's actually a lesson here that relates to this workshop. And it's that you really need to beware of clickbait whenever you're looking at any content related to code style or code readability. People online in general love to post hot takes for attention. Again, it's just kind of what you have to do to get people's attention nowadays. And it often results in takes like this, where people just go and flatly say something like, you know, don't write comments. And the problem with that is nuanced takes just don't get views. Problem with that is that this is an inherently nuanced topic, right? When it comes to code readability, you can't just look at one little bullet point and then follow it through to the end. Otherwise, your code quality is actually going to be hurt. So if you just look at that thumbnail and you don't watch the whole video, you shouldn't go around making bold claims like, oh, you never want to write comments, right? There's a time and a place for everything. So another thing that you also need to remember is something that's readable for me does not necessarily mean it's readable for you. Now, just for a quick example here, I want to give y'all maybe like 30 seconds, 25, 30 seconds to just read through this and see if you can figure out what it does. Okay. So anyone who I guess who read this and doesn't know what this is doing, would you like to raise your hand? No judgment here. Okay. So this might be most of y'all didn't raise your hand, and reason why is because it's perfectly readable for most of you because you know React, right? If you've done work in React before, you can very quickly recognize that this is a React component. What it does is it's fetching some scores for some sports team from an external source. So load scores, and then it sets the scores in a use state variable. But if you haven't used React, right, you might wouldn't know what a fragment here is. You wouldn't know what use effect does. You might not know what use state does either, even if you can maybe infer it. And the rest of this code is kind of readable. You can kind of tell, okay, it's called a scoreboard. There's loading scores involved. So that's good. But still, if you don't know React, then you won't be able to really understand what's happening here. So you have to remember that readability is a function of experience. Yeah, Brian.
So that brings up the question.
Mhm.
If say an entire team is working using some framework like I'm just gonna say Stealth because I actually don't know Stealth.
Right.
And is it worth making the code more readable to people who don't know Stealth?
Okay, so that is a very good question. Brian asked, let's say you're a code base working on Svelte. Is it worth making your code base more readable to people who don't know Svelte? Really, that is the kind of question that you would need someone with more years in the industry to answer. My guess is it would depend on how you're looking to hire in the future. So if you're planning on only hiring like more experienced Svelte devs, then you could probably get away with that. But if you're going to hire, let's say, a lot of junior engineers out of college who might not have used Svelte before, then you could have an argument for making it, I guess, more beginner friendly. Uh, but yeah, it's a really good question. And again, you'd probably be better off asking someone who spent more years in the industry, such as the Primogen, who also came up with this quote here that I love. Again, readability is a function of experience. You'll be able to understand more things the more you learn. And I highly recommend you check out his YouTube channel if you just like learning stuff about coding. All right, so now for the next rule, we've kind of gone over that sometimes a lot of readability stuff is just down to style and preference. What's really important is that you are consistent, right? So you should pick a style, and then once you've picked it, stick to it. It keeps everyone on the same page. It keeps everything consistent across your code base. And it also keeps expectations clear for people because once you have those guidelines in place, they're going to know what their code is expected to look like. Now, devs tend to fight over a lot of petty, small opinions like, camel case versus snake case, tabs versus spaces, Vim versus Emacs, you name it. And frankly, it's not always the most productive use of time. Everyone has an opinion, and just having clear standards in place helps to prevent arguments. You don't want to waste energy on small details like that because your actual job is to actually build your product with the code that you're writing. So, I would say you don't want to get too attached to any like coding style. Whatever your team is using, just use what they're using. Just pick something and stick to it. Consistency is key. And one thing that I think really helps with writing good code is to basically copy your senior devs once you get to your internship. Because think about it, the people who are going to be approving your request are the ones who you want to copy, right? So not only is that going to make your job a little bit easier because there's going to be less ambiguity on how to style your code, the people who again have that say in whether you're performing well are going to be like, yeah, he writes well-styled code because it's my style. So our next rule is going to be to follow style guides. And there are a lot of examples of these. A lot of big companies have published style guides for languages that you can find on the internet. So Google has a JavaScript style guide. You can find these on like Google or GitHub. Airbnb has one. There's a coding style document for the Linux kernel. And in general, if your team has one of these style guides, you want to follow those. And if your team has their own guidelines, obviously follow that above a style guide. If you're starting your own project, it might be worth looking at a style guide just to kind of get experience about what it's like. They've got a whole lot of guidelines for you there. And one thing about style guides, though, is it might get pretty tedious if you're trying to follow them manually, right? Like, I don't think many of y'all would consciously think, okay, I'm going to have another window of the Google style guide open while I'm coding. So we can use something called auto formatters that follow the style guides for us. Now, the most popular one is Prettier. Style guide auto formatters, will automatically style your code at certain points. So you can have it style your code on save. You could type something up, hit save in your editor, and the auto formatter will run and fix your code up for you. You can also have it run on a pre-commit script. So one thing that I saw at a company before was that before you would make a commit on Git and then push it to GitHub, they would run a script that automatically ran the formatter on all of the code that you just checked in. So that way everything you wrote would be according to style. And it's really great because it just takes the work out of your hands. And you can actually make this happen on just any kind of script, right? So another thing that I've seen is some people might attach the auto formatter to their test script. So when you run your unit tests, it auto formats them for you. So again, it does the formatting so you don't have to. And they have a lot of different ones for different languages. The most popular one is Prettier, which is used for TypeScript and JavaScript. There's also Google Java Formatter, AutoPep8 for Python, Go Format for Go, and predictably Rust Format for Rust. So the next rule is going to be to use descriptive names. I'm going to actually look at some code examples now. So let's look at an example of something that you don't want to do. Let's say I've got a function called calculate, takes in, D and H, and float R is half of D. Float A is pi times R times R, and it returns A times H. Now, okay, seems like it's doing some kind of math here, but there's just so much ambiguity, right? What are we calculating? What is D? What is H? What is A? A lot of open questions here. Does anyone here think they could figure out what this is, Brian? You're correct. Yeah. Okay. So like Brian said, this is a formula for the volume of a cylinder. But if you're writing code in production, you're probably better off writing that because you see, we're still in college. We had to take Calc 3 a couple of years ago, but our 40-year-old coworkers probably can't recognize the volume of a cylinder just from looking at the formula. So if you have to do that, you need to make it really clear what you're doing. Notice how we named the function cylinder volume. It tells you exactly what you're doing. Some people might call this get cylinder volume to make it clear that it's a function and not a variable. We're very clear that the inputs we have here are the diameter and the height. We're calculating the radius and the base area, and the final result is the base area times the radius, right? There's no ambiguity here. Base area times radius. Ooh. It should be times height. I was wrong. Okay, but you see, I got the formula wrong and I'm still in college. So imagine if your grown coworkers haven't seen this formula in 10 years, look at the previous version like this, right? Again, they're going to be confused and kind of upset with you. So again, make things clear. If that was maybe just R, maybe Brian would not have caught that mistake and it would have led to a bug in production. So just in general, variable names should describe what it stores. Function names should describe what it does. Kind of seems like Captain Obvious, but just really driving the point home. Sometimes you might see one letter variables, like I'm sure we've all seen in for loops, for I equals 0. Those small variables can be okay in certain contexts where it has a really small scope typically. So if you just have a for loop where you're iterating through the index and it's I, that's fine because everyone knows what that is, right? But again, in examples like we just saw, a one-letter variable where the meaning isn't clear really hurts readability. Now, one really controversial topic is abbreviations. Some people love to use them. Some people are completely against them. My personal take on this is to use abbreviations if you know your whole team knows them. And there's typically two types of abbreviations. You have general computer science related terms and domain specific abbreviations. So coding abbreviations, those are things that every developer knows, right? So things like OS stands for operating system, right? UI is a user interface. A DB is a database. ENV is an environment, and a CFG is a config, right? All of you guys probably knew most of these and recognize them immediately. And I would say most professional software engineers should be able to recognize what these terms mean. So I would say that abbreviations like these are okay. Now, domain-specific abbreviations are specific to the business or field that your app is in. So let's say you're making some kind of app that relates to cars, right? MPG stands for miles per gallon. It might be expected that everyone on the team is more familiar with that because your whole business is working with cars. If you're working on business or finance, ROI, return on investment, that might be common knowledge in your field. And if you're working on some kind of retail app, SKU, which stands for stock keeping unit, might be another really common term. So again, this can also vary from company to company. What I recommend is reading the code base once you get there, seeing what the conventions are that your coworkers are using already and adopting those. But if you're just starting on something, that's my personal take on it. It's okay if you know that the other developers are going to know what those other abbreviations are. All right, so the next rule is that comments are for the why, not the what. Now, this one is also really controversial sometimes. One thing that you should absolutely not do with comments is be super redundant, right? So I have a comment here that loads all the high scores saved. And the function's called load high scores. And so it completely, we get an array list to put our scores into. We like read a file, get all the stuff. You get the idea how this works. The comment is just basically a repeat of the function name. And since we have a descriptive name, like we said earlier, that comment's completely unnecessary. So there's no reason for us to have that. Now, another really bad example, look at this comment here. Returns to the start screen by setting the active screen to the start screen. So the function is called return to start. Active screen equals start screen. Audio stop game song, reset game. And that's the end of the function, 4 lines. Just to show you how bad this comment is, the comment has just as many words as the function. And it tells you less information because the comment doesn't tell you that it stops the audio. So like it's completely useless here. Now I will go full disclosure. Those last 2 examples you saw are actually from a project that I worked on. But it was because the teacher made us put a comment literally on every function. And in cases like these, it's unnecessary, in my opinion. But does that mean that comments are evil? Like this guy was saying, right? Are we going to hold that extreme opinion? Absolutely not, right? There are a bunch of very good times to leave comments. And I'll say that the 3 biggest are anytime you're dealing with a really complex logic, any kind of unusual code if you're doing something unusual, or this is a more specific one, if you're writing a library and you're trying to provide documentation. Because not everything can be described with a good name, right? Some things are just inherently complicated. So one example of this is Doom. Now, game programming, as some of y'all know, can get pretty complicated sometimes. So let's look at an example of this. If you guys have ever heard of Doom, it's an old first-person shooter from the 90s. Pretty much birthed a lot of the games that we love and play now, like Call of Duty. And they actually open sourced the whole thing in the late 90s. So I just kind of wanted to quickly look here. So this function is called doom loop. For those of y'all who aren't familiar with game programming, this is something called a game loop. Basically, the way a game works is every single frame, it gets some input from your keyboard or controller, updates the state that you have in the game, and then draws some new data to the screen. And it does that on every single frame. So this is what the game loop looks like for Doom. Now, as you can see, we got some pretty good function names here. Let me zoom in a bit. Can I? All right, there we go. So you can see it says G begin recording. We can assume that's beginning a recording, printing some debug info to the screen after debug file. But look here at the frequent comments, right? Frame synchronous IO operations, process 1 or more ticks. Even if you don't know exactly what these comments mean, look how frequent some of these are. And this was written by a guy, if I've ever heard of John Carmack, who's widely considered to be one of the greatest programmers of all time. So not every developer agrees on not having a lot of comments, right? And for contexts like these, where you might have some kind of additional context in a function that might not fit with the name, this could be useful to have. So again, you're going to get a different answer depending on who you ask. But I think anytime you're dealing with more complicated stuff, it's okay to have more comments like these. And if anything, I would maybe lean on the side of having a bit more. Now, Another really good use of comments might be if you're writing library documentation. Some libraries will have really long comments above their function definitions that are essentially the documentation for the libraries. The reason why you want to do that is because it will let you read that documentation directly from your IDE. So this is a library called SDL. It's another game development library. I should have it open in a VS Code right here. So as you can see, I can just hover over the library function, and after it loads, it will give me all the information here. So it tells me flags that might be useful. This is like 3 paragraphs, right? So that's really useful because you don't have to keep switching between tabs. I'm sorry, switching between windows from your editor to your browser. So if you're writing libraries, this could be a really good use for having a long comment. So now that's going to bring us into our next rule, which is breaking up long lines. So we've all seen functions sometimes that just were really long, like character-wise. Like, for example, this is a constructor for an object called student. The student has things that all students have, like a name, a last name, ID, and a GPA. And this could be really annoying to look at on a screen sometimes, right? Because oftentimes we might have multiple windows open side by side, so you have to horizontal scroll a bunch, and it's just annoying. So one thing that I didn't realize I could do when I was an underclassman is that you can just literally move the arguments to a new line like this. And for functions that have a lot of arguments, this is really good because not only can you kind of get away with having longer, more descriptive names, but you can also, again, have less horizontal space. So that way, if you're having multiple code windows up, you don't have to keep horizontal scrolling. And I personally think this is way better. And there's a lot of other situations than in just defining functions, right? So when you're calling a function, let's say we wanted to call that same constructor that has like 5 arguments, we can just break each individual argument onto a new line. And I think that's a lot easier to read and follow. Now, if you have a function that isn't as long, what you can do is just move the part of the code past the equal sign onto a new line. This is something you can do in a lot of languages. So, you might not need to break this up into individual lines, but it makes it a little bit easier to read, less horizontal scrolling. If you have a long conditional statements, it can be really helpful. So let's say you want to check if a point is inside a rectangle. Another, I guess, game dev kind of thing. What you might do is see if the x coordinates are between the x coordinates of the points and if the y coordinates are between the y coordinates of the 2 corners, which requires us to check 4 different conditions, right? And again, it can be a bit hard to read and you have to scroll a lot. So if you just move it like that, each condition has its own line. It's easier to follow with your eyes and you don't have to scroll horizontally. And then finally with arrays, obviously this one's so bad it goes off the screen completely, right? Well, again, if you just break everything onto a new line, we all of a sudden get 2 more courses that we couldn't even see before. So I believe that was the last of the kind of main examples that we had time for tonight. We might do a part 2 of this workshop, but there's just a lot of things. Some things, some quick general ideas you might hear about. One is reducing nesting. If your functions get indented a lot, it can make things really hard to read because you start having to do that horizontal scrolling again. And it's also a bit harder to track with your eyes. Some things like early returns and like inverting statements can help with that. I'm actually gonna, there's a really good YouTube video on this that I'm just gonna show you guys the name of the video now. And yes, this is from the same guy who wrote the Don't Write Comments video. So also shows even if there's a guy who you take good advice from, don't heed everything they say as religion. But this video right here, I'm a never nester, goes into this topic a lot more detail if you guys want to see it. And I'm not going to play that now. Another thing is to use ternary statements responsibly. This is another thing that people get really controversial over. A ternary statement is basically a replacement for an else if. I'll just show a quick example of this live. So let's say I want to assign some kind of statement based on an else if variable. So I'll do this in TypeScript. Oh wait, no, I did not mean to go live. Okay. I accidentally started a web server, yeah. All right, so trying to keep the mic in my hand here. Can you guys on? Complicated conditionals. This could be very useful, especially for those like quick assignments where you have to decide the value of something based on an if-else condition, but it doesn't, you don't want to have to write an entire if-else block. That being said, these are very easy to abuse because some people like to chain ternaries together for really complicated conditions, and that can make your code really hard to read. So my personal opinion, and a lot of people agree with this, if your statement goes on really long, just use a normal if-else condition because it can get pretty hard to read. And you can also, I don't think it's a good idea to chain ternaries. I've never seen anyone like chain a ternary in real code until I saw the bad code examples for this. if anyone has other examples, please feel free to point me out wrong, but it can go you have to be careful when doing that. Like, you've changed ternaries. Did you regret doing it?
The trick is how
Right. Yeah, and another thing you can do too, like Blake said, is like we said, you break up stuff into different lines. You can put your ternaries onto different lines too. So one thing that someone might do is if you, let's say you have a longer variable that you're assigning, you can break each condition up onto a different statement like this. So the first condition goes on the second line and the next condition goes on this line. And that is pretty much as crazy as you should let a ternary get. In my view, if your ternary is going for like more than 3 lines, you should probably just use a normal if else statement. But that being said, if you have things like nested if else's and it's just based on really simple conditions, ternaries can be really good to eliminate some of those and make it easier to read. And then I think this is like the last actual rule. In general, try to use declarative code sometimes. You might find it a lot nicer to work with. Now, when someone says code is declarative, that just means you're writing code that tells you what it does instead of necessarily how. So I'm going to give another really quick example. Let's say, how many of you guys are familiar with JavaScript array functions? Show of hands. Okay, so if you've used JavaScript before, you'll know what I'm about to do. Can I stand this up? Traditionally do it. But with declarative code, we can actually do this whole thing in one line. So JavaScript has array functions. Same thing as a for loop. Now, map is a function that basically takes every single element in the array and runs the same function on those elements. So we pass a lambda function here. It's called an arrow function. What it allows you to do is to just write a function without naming it. So this is basically saying this is a function that takes in a number and then returns that number times 2. So we're able to put that right into the map function. And we've taken this from 4 lines of code to 1. And again, like we said, short code is not the end all be all, but in cases like this where it's easy and simple to understand, you want to use tricks like these. And exactly what kind of functions you're using is going to depend on your tool and language. Like declarative code basically just means that you're using some kind of abstraction over something. And that is pretty much all there is to it. You got to do more research on the language.